When I first went to the NAB show, I was simply astonished.
It was in 1976, and the NAB show was in Chicago at that time.
First time I attended an NAB show was 1971 when I bought my first radio stations.
So it was very, very small compared to what we have these days, but it was still, an amazing experience.
It really has come a long way. Way back, this was an event that represented what the industry looked like back then. So from the beginnings of radio and television, they were basic. This was analog world, and we were talking about cameras and microphones and just what the basic things you needed and were available at that time. And these were big things, right? These were cameras the size of small refrigerators and mics that you took up and blocked everybody's face and all that sort of good stuff. That reflects how technology evolves, and so it was very much way back then a hardware equipment kind of event when it first started out.
The very first NAB show, 23 people showed up at that event.
Let's talk about some milestones first. Let's talk about the 1920s, I guess it was. When did radio become this commercial enterprise?
Well, actually, radio was doing something of commercial nature a full decade before this. But nothing really came of that. Nothing really came of radio. It didn't enter the home in a full-scale fashion until 1920, when a Westinghouse sponsored station in Pittsburgh, KDKA, began broadcasting the results of the presidential election, the elections that fall. And then people became very interested in radio, and people began manufacturing radios. I'm not going to say flew off the shelves, but there was an enormous amount of interest in radio.
Now, what about television? When did television sort of find its home in a commercial market? How did that happen?
It went through a very evolutionary process from a mechanical system where you had spinning discs with holes or lenses in them to an all-electronic system with a camera tube, a cathode ray tube. And of course, this further morphed and developed through the 1930s. By the late 30s, there were some stations on the air experimentally transmitting television, and one of those was in New York City, and the first regular television service started with the beginning of the World's Fair in 1939.
So then we moved, because nothing in this business stays the same. So that we've got radio, TV, now color, and then there's this move to videotape?
1956 at the NARTB show, that was the name at the time for the NAB, it was the National Association of Radio and Television Broadcasters. Ampex unveiled the first successful practical videotape machine, and it just took the show by storm.
Now, I wanted to talk about digital too, because that's sort of the current revolution that our business is undergoing. Talk about that. How did that evolve, and what has that done to our world? It's similar to the explosion of videotape, I guess.
It is and it isn't. Again, digital would not have been possible really and truly without the invention of the transistor. Late 1947, early 48, when it was announced to the world by Bell Labs. And it took a while for the transistor to finally displace the vacuum tube. The early transistors couldn't do much. It was a fairly poor device, but it was perfected over time.
Right.
So the jump then became, let's start chaining these transistors together, and somebody came up with the idea of a chip, an integrated circuit, which made things even smaller. And again, the microprocessor, now we're getting into an era, a period where you can put all this stuff together and you can get away from analog and do something. You can digitize a picture, a scene. You can store it as zeros and ones and record it, save it that way. You can manipulate it in post-production, and eventually you can transmit it, which is what we began doing on a totally complete basis in 2009. So this was the evolution, this was the jump, beginning with the transistor really and truly until the time where we switched off our analog broadcasting and moved into digital totally.